Today's video examines one of Ireland's most enigmatic historical figures, Watty Cox. Everything about Watty Cox, from his history, his imprisonment and emigration, to his name and family life, sound more like fiction than reality. The major points of his life have been repeated incessantly among those who study his life. Like a boy's adventure novel, Cox's historians describe the most wild and interesting aspects of his adventure. Yet less is known about who Cox was when he wasn't raging against the government, public institutions, or other journalists. I don't know how much of this other history I will untangle in the short video, but I will try my best to balance the superfluous details of his life with a more grounded analysis of who Cox was and what his impact was to Irish journalism. Walter Cox, more commonly known as Watty, was born into the household of a Westmeath blacksmith. He was born into these humble beginnings around 1770, but exact dates are unknown. In fact, little is known about Cox until the late 18th century when he became more invested in nationalist politics and the publishing industry itself. In many ways, he has become defined by his revolutionary views, and while they provide intrigue and a biography that reads like an adventure story, they do not provide a realistic picture of Cox's mysterious upbringing. Here's what is known about Cox's early years. He was born into a provincial, working-class lifestyle. His father was a part of the Defenders of Ireland, a Catholic organization which resisted Protestant raids on Catholic homes in the night. This movement occurred during Cox's teenage years and undoubtedly shaped some of his political views. His father was arrested by Lord Carhampton on suspicion that he was part of the movement, which may have also made the nationalist struggle more real for young Walter. One may even conclude that the struggle was literally a domestic strife between English Protestant invaders who threatened the Irish lifestyle and tried to control them. This working-class upbringing definitely influenced Cox's later political views, which often called for extreme action on behalf of the working classes. This upbringing rendered him vehemently anti-English, anti-monarchy, and basically anti-any publication that was not revolutionary. Researchers also know that Watty was apprenticed as a gunsmith, but it is unclear if he ever used this training as part of his profession. It is clear, however, that the pen, figuratively speaking, was his weapon of choice. Where he picked up the ability or desire to write is unknown. How he came into the newspaper industry is equally mysterious. There's little information about where he went to school, what he read in his youth, and how he developed the idea to begin revolutionary broadsheets and periodicals. Cox only emerges as a notable figure once the paper trail begins in 1797. It was in this year that he established the short-lived Union Star. The Star was a broadsheet which Cox edited and issued secretly. It was vehemently against the castle and the monarchy, so much so that its publisher and printer were unnamed. It attacked other newspaper editors, such as Francis Higgins of the Freeman's Journal. The Union Star was so extreme in its politics that it became known as the Murder Gazette because it often suggested murdering political figures as part of the nationalist cause. As a result of these extremist opinions, even the most liberal United Irishmen members distanced themselves from it. As Ireland's premier nationalist group, the United Irishmen would have no part of Cox's politics or his suggestions for political assassinations. The Union Star brought much attention to Cox once the government suppressed it in 1798. Cox claimed full responsibility for the publication under condition that he would be pardoned. He convinced authorities that he meant little harm by the publication and that receiving personal notoriety superseded his political intentions. Little did they know, Cox was only beginning his career as a revolutionist thinker and writer. At this time, Cox left Ireland for a while and went to Baltimore. His stay in America began around 1801 and he returned to Ireland in 1802. He may have been bankrupt, but this period of time has sparse historical details. Until 1807, Cox had once again seemingly dropped off the map in terms of anything exciting happening in his life, but that doesn't mean that he was inactive. We just don't know enough. It certainly does not mean that his political sympathies dissipated. Nor did his interest in publishing because he recognized the press as a primary means of disseminating his views and expanding his audience. He believed in this nationalist cause wholeheartedly, and his conviction remained throughout much of his life. Other than this conviction, we know little about Cox beyond his publications. He had a family, but this family life was disrupted by his numerous imprisonments, which I will discuss later. His son Walter died while Watty was imprisoned. Little is known about Cox's wife other than John Brennan's magazine once depicted Cox murdering her, but I cannot corroborate this information. The depiction is almost certainly untrue because it is a byproduct of the ongoing battle between Cox's and Brennan's publications. It may be easy to assume, however, just as Cox's life was often fractured by his views and the consequences that he faced when he expressed them, His family life endured the same kind of fracturing. They were rarely stable financially, and they likely never functioned as a cohesive family unit. In 1807, Cox began his most notorious and long-running publication, called the Irish Magazine. Its extended title was Monthly Asylum for Neglected Biography, and it maintained this view initially. He focused on biographical sketches of key Irish and public figures. Cox's politics, however, were never far behind. The publication soon morphed into an anti-English publication. Like the Union Star did a few years previously, the Irish magazine captured the English government's attention. Robert Peel himself exclaimed that the magazine's purpose was to, quote, ferment a bitter hatred against England, end quote. The publication was, at its roots, designed to attract this attention. Cox could not be ignored by the government and issued the Irish Magazine as a polemic periodical under the guise of an innocent biographical journal. The views that the Irish Magazine expressed often backfired. Cox was charged with libel on numerous occasions, 3 of which we know that he was imprisoned for. Even prison, however, could not prevent Cox from issuing his personal attacks on public figures, on the established church, and on his many dissenters. Cox continued to manage the publication from prison, serving as its primary editor while behind bars in 1811. He was able to get the content to a publisher who distributed the copies despite the apparent limitations of having the primary figurehead imprisoned. The next time that Cox was harassed by the government, however, he gave in. He was pressured to the point that he left for America once again. This time, however, he was given £100 per annum to stay away and £400 up front. Essentially, they paid him to leave Ireland. Anyone who is following this saga knows that Cox could not stay quiet. He accepted the pension and tried to begin an American publication called The Exile in 1817-1818. It was said to be for wit, humor, and Irish intelligence, to be circulated in America and to Cox's Irish sympathizers through Irish correspondence. Once again appearing as an innocent conventional journal, The Exile was almost a replica of the Irish Magazine and was issued in the same spirit. Ultimately, it was unsuccessful and probably never achieved a large enough circulation to warrant continuing the cause through this avenue. In true Watty Coxian fashion, he returned to Ireland in 1822. Some say he was deported to France and then returned to Ireland. What is important to know here is that Cox forfeited his pension for almost inexplicable reasons and, as surprising as that may be, seems just par for the course for Walter Cox. Despite this romanticized vision of Watty Cox, the reality was that he was poor for much of the rest of his life. After forfeiting his government pension, Cox's return to Ireland lacked the traction that his earlier activities had. Researchers know that he tried to become a librarian and that he wrote some plays sympathizing with nationalist causes, which suggests that he maintained his interest in publishing into his later years. His politics did not change, but financial concerns likely kept him from issuing any more large-scale publications. Moreover, Cox didn't have much traction in the nationalist community anymore. He was often denounced by influential public figures such as John Brennan of the Malazine magazine. Whereas Cox was tolerated at the beginning of the century, the new nationalist discourse had established itself. The movement had its path, and Cox was on the outside looking in. Daniel O'Connell, who once defended Cox when he was up on libel charges, spearheaded this nationalist cause. A play written by Cox in 1833 attacked O'Connell, which suggests that there was a rift between them despite any previous allegiance. Like his stance in the Union Star, Cox positioned himself outside of even the current nationalist movement. Unlike his previous experience where his views gained notoriety and attention, this rift would have hindered any attempts that Cox made to spread his own views about Irish nationalism. One of the last things that is known about Cox is that he tried to cut off the head of King William's statue in the park. Any enduring conversation about Cox the person revolves around what could have been. Many describe him as a brilliant thinker with an ability to gain the public's attention. Had he not been extreme to the point of being feared and later ostracized, he would have been an influential Irish public figure. Had he fallen into line and not betrayed or denounced the current nationalists, he could have been a figurehead in their movement. He had the conviction and intellect to succeed in their circles, but he chose a different path. For more information about Watty Cox and his exciting life, please consult the following resources. Seamus O'Casade's Watty Cox and his publication is the primary resource for anything Watty Cox oriented. It provides a detailed overview of Cox's work and even suggests from where some of Cox's political insights derive. Searching for Watty Cox in the Waterloo directory is a great place to begin because the search results will produce detailed information about Cox's publications. The directory also provides alternate resources for anyone wanting to delve into these publications further. Library Ireland and Recorso.net have brief biographies of Walter Cox if anyone is looking for a quick overview of his life. These websites are similar to what Wikipedia would provide if it had any information about Cox. I am fascinated every time that I study Watty Cox. Parts of his life seem even more novelesque than realistic. He's truly a man who lived on the margins of society and who continues to reside on the margins of history. On one hand, there's a constant desire to uncover more about his life and who he was beyond his nationalistic views. On the other hand, there's trepidation that the truth cannot possibly live up to the legend, so it may indeed be better to leave things as they are. Thanks for listening.